Yeah, hi everybody. I realize I'm the last person standing between us here and the cocktail bar. So I think officially the slot I have is 50 minutes, but I'll keep it short. It's not that complicated, federating the content layer. So probably within 25 minutes, you'll understand all about what I want to talk about today. Just a few notes about Hygraph. So we started as Graph CMS, which was actually the first GraphQL native content management system just after the release of the open sourcing of GraphQL. And we're still GraphQL native, so GraphQL is a really big part of our story, and you know, we're active in the community and everything. And I think that the story I'll talk about today around content federation, GraphQL plays a big role in this. It has many benefits, but we'll talk more about that later. So yeah, we have a very strong GraphQL API. It's a content management platform. That means we also have you know, very powerful business tooling, as you would expect from a content management system. And content federation, the topic for today, is really this this thing where this evolutionary thing we see the content management market moving into. So you know, we've been around for a number of years. We have customers all around the world, the majority in North America and Europe, in different kinds of industries, and yeah. I think we in particular shine in use cases where customers use us for a lot of, let's say, a lot of content, a lot of interesting relations between the different content entries and such. So that's enough about us for now. In this talk, the main problem I'll be addressing, and the reason for why we think content federation is, you know, is such an interesting direction, is that I guess, you know, this is probably not a debate anymore. The move from monoliths to microservices and mock architectures is by now, you know, it's very clear that this is the big trend, right? A few years ago, maybe this is something that was more for the early adopters, but I think we've passed that point, and you know, even the analyst community is talking about it in the sense of this being the inevitable direction. And that's great because it brings a number of benefits in terms of you know, lower total cost of ownership and maintainability and all these things. But it also brings complexity. And I'll focus on content because that's kind of the origin of where our product comes from. But you can interpret content in a broad sense. So content in this case means all kinds of data, not just text or images, but you know, in an e-commerce scenario, you would think about things like availability and pricing, but also like customer information. There's all kinds of different things that I think all fall under the umbrella of content. And what we see in our customer base and in the market is that content is also going away from this sort of monolithic, you have one system that has all your content, to content can come from anywhere. It can be all kinds of third-party sources that contribute to the content that goes into your digital experience. It may be programmatically generated, it may be user-generated, so there's also some complexity here. And what that means is that your microservices, your composable architecture, in that situation, you have a potential orchestration problem. You have all these different things, all these different silos, and they all need to come together. And that's what I'll be talking about today, how we see a direction to address that problem in a way that you know, brings more business value without having to spend too much time on this orchestration problem. Before I get to that, I want to take a quick step back and look at a little bit the history of the content management market, because you know, I see this as an evolution. And so if we look at how the internet got started in the 90s, you know, most websites, the first websites were really just kind of brochureware, right? So you've had companies that used to have these paper brochures. And, you know, before people got inspired to think about what's all of what can I do with this new thing called the internet, the first thing that happens is you take what you have in the physical world and you bring it online. And that means managing sites was also just file-based, you know, FTPs and all simple. But very quickly on, being able to manage those websites through business tooling, not having to involve engineers for everything, this kind of, having workflows around content. This is how the concept of a content management system was was born, basically. But this is the early days where you have a CMS, it's for the web, for one website or a small set of websites. It's kind of by nature monolithic because the situation is just much simpler. I'm going to call this traditional CMS kind of, but the idea is that these are all around websites, often based around sort of theming and templates, mostly proprietary, very tightly coupled. What you see in particular in the early 2000s is you kind of see the first wave of CMSs coming into the market. So, I mean, there's tons of them. I put a bunch of logos here on the slide, but I could have put probably like 3 times as many logos if I wanted to, right? So there's just, all the technology-wise, this is, the focus is on the back end. You kind of have let's say the technology discussions are around, do you care about PHP or Java or .NET? And that decides which system you pick. And then you kind of jump into a monolith, and these systems kind of grew to offer a big feature set. And I think that worked well for at least 10 years. And many of these systems are still around. So I'm not saying that these systems don't completely work anymore, but of course the world has changed since then. And I guess the biggest change came when, from late in the 2000s, the iPhone is of course iconic, but there's many, this whole wave of connected systems, Internet of Things, mobile devices, different channels, up to maybe you have voice and all these other channels nowadays, kind of made it more and more painful to have this tight coupling between a website and a content management system, or this backend system. So that kind of brings us to what I'll call the present, which is something that kind of started in the early 2010s, I guess, and it's a situation we're probably still more or less in, which is the introduction of the headless CMS, but also in general the adoption of headless as a way to approach these kinds of systems. The idea here being that you remove the coupling from your system of record, your backend system, be it content or something related, to specifically one channel, and you replace that with an API that says, okay, I don't care from the perspective of that system where my content is being used. You can create it here and you can manage it, but it can be used wherever you want. And so it is unified, but you have all the different destinations for that content, be it like mobile apps, websites, could be your fridge, your smart. I don't have a smartwatch, but you get the point. And this is great because it just brings a lot of flexibility, in particular on the technical side, without removing completely the tooling that business users need to be able to manage this content. And so these systems are API-oriented, they're front-end agnostic, and contrast that with the monolithic traditional CMSs. There is an element of this being like the pendulum swinging back a bit more towards the developer. So I think there was some, in the traditional CMSs, you see some of the business capabilities around really managing pages and stuff kind of disappearing a little bit, but what you get back is a lot of flexibility. And for developers, this was, I guess, a great step forward. And that's also when you see like what I'll call the second wave of CMSs, which is, again, I only picked like 6 logos because I have way too many logos on this slide already. But also in this category of headless CMS, there are probably tens, if not hundreds, of different options in the market. And I guess Contentful was one of the first, and we got started in 2016, if I'm not, end of 2016. And so there's another proliferation of these systems really going with this trend of being front-end agnostic. And it's not a coincidence that this also goes hand in hand with the shift in this technology way of looking at things, where it was sort of these back-end PHP, Java, .NET focus in the 2010s is in the 2000s. Then in the 2010s and beyond, you see all of these JavaScript frameworks coming about. And I put Angular and React here on the slide, but there are of course others, which really created an explosion of sort of new capabilities for creating a really rich experience in the front end. And of course, those kinds of technologies work well. They don't really work with the traditional CMSs because they are locked into templating languages and stuff. And this works great with the headless systems. And I guess related, particularly relevant for us, and it'll be relevant for later in the story, but the open sourcing of GraphQL by Facebook in 2016 is also kind of a big step forward in terms of developer flexibility and productivity, because GraphQL just has a number of inherent benefits to avoid over/under fetching, for example, and just all these performance improvements. So there are its benefits, but I think what you've seen the last few years, in particular with sort of this microservices really gaining traction, is that there's kind of a new problem that is arising. I wouldn't say it's completely new, but it becomes more painful the more the richer all these digital experiences that we're all having are becoming. And that's the problem that nowadays you don't have just a large number of destinations for all of your content. You also have a multitude of different sources. So you may combine legacy systems or some system of record, a CRM or e-commerce system, or a whole host of all these different systems that contain a piece of the content, a piece of data. And all of that needs to come together and then, again, be distributed to all these different front ends. So basically, you have a sort of an orchestration problem here. You have all these different, this data all needs to come together. And it's not just about putting these data and just merging them together. It's also about the interrelations. I might have data here that relates to data there, but they're in different systems. How do I make sure that I create that connection without having to go back to a monolithic situation and put everything into one bucket? And so what many organizations are left with is this problem of, okay, I have to have some sort of middleware in between. I need to develop this, but that's quite expensive, and there's risks associated with this. And there's of course, the problem isn't completely new. You do have solutions in this sort of API orchestration space, but in particular, the element of cross relations between different content and different sources is something that's not well solved. And I got this quote from a COSware article, but we see this also in our customer base and in conversations with analysts. This idea that this sort of integration of all these different applications and platforms is a growing problem because you need to invest time and money into it, and there's risks of additional costs. There's risks of project delays or project failures even. So it's a pervasive issue. And what we think that leads to in the end is that this idea that investments in digital experience are upside down. Many organizations are left to spend a lot of their money and effort into the backend services, middleware, integration, all that stuff. Whereas that's important, but it doesn't drive customer value and in the end, business value. So the more we can take the bottom of the left-hand pyramid and reduce the effort there, the more time becomes available for the top side of the right-hand pyramid. So that brings us to what's next. What can we do about this problem, and also why do we think that the CMS, the content management system, has a role to play here? Well, for me, that starts with a concept that actually comes out of the GraphQL space, which is federation. This is something that I think got started with Apollo going into sort of stitching. So if I have different GraphQL APIs and I want to combine the data together, then their original concept was schema stitching. but that got replaced by Federation. I want to stay out of the specific details of how that works, but the basic idea is that this is a concept that leverages powers that GraphQL has for giving developers flexibility to very specifically get what they want, and combine it with sort of middleware technology that allows you to have these different services and their own APIs, have them be developed independently, but still combine information one into the other. And the main benefits of Federation, if you have some sort of middleware based around a Federation, is that it allows the individual services that kind of go into this to be developed independently, where the sort of the integration is very relatively quick and easy to set up. So it's these architectures based around Federation are quick to understand. The developers can onboard onto them very easily. Modifications, improvements, bug fixes and stuff can be done quite quickly. It scales well, etc. It's manageable. And also it's very easy to sort of incrementally go into this direction. And I mentioned Apollo, you also have the Guild more recently. There are systems in place that kind of really focus on this, but they are developer-only tools. There's a lot of power in those kinds of solutions, but I think what we're advocating for is kind of an additional step on top of this. What we see right now is that Federation, GraphQL Federation, is a topic that is still being defined. So there are a lot of different companies that are starting to make moves in this area of offering services around using GraphQL for this orchestration problem. So you have Netlify on the hosting side that acquired like OneGraph, which is a sort of solution for this. You have Tyke and MuleSoft from the API gateway side venturing into this area a little bit. Hazura and others on the database as a service side. So, and then there's also a bit more for the commerce market, companies like Uniform, for example, that approaches from the experience orchestration side. So it's really interesting to see that there are a lot of companies that are recognizing that this is a problem that's worth solving, and they're all approaching it from different angles. But I'm making the case that the content platform is the better the better layer to solve this problem. And the reason for that is that I think it's whatever is available in the market right now focuses on developers only. But one of the key tenets of CMS systems is that you give developers the freedom to do what they want, but you put tooling in place for business users to do the stuff that business users need to be doing. The idea is that developers get to focus on the technical side of that experience, whereas you have marketers and other business people that manage the actual content, manage the relations and stuff. If you leave that only to developers, it becomes more inflexible. And so this is a quote that I really like from one of our investors, which is that an interesting thing happens if you combine sort of the flexibility of a database, which has all this content, with the tangibility of a CMS, so the fact that you can see what's happening and you can work with it easily, and it's visible through an easy to use API user interface, and then extensibility that you have in an API gateway to bring all these things together. And so that's why we think that a federated content platform is the logical extension of headless CMS, because if you create this solution where you can have the benefits of GraphQL Federation with the tooling that's already in place for managing content, then you kind of keep the benefits of headless CMS, and you add the availability, the federation capabilities here. Specifically, the way we're currently looking at solving, this is, by the way, not a problem that is completely solved, but we are, I think, the first and only system from the content management side that is taking steps into this area. And we started doing that by introducing a concept called remote sources. The idea is that in the Hygraph content platform, we have a low-code or no-code, actually, user interface that allows you to connect remote systems to the schema, the content schema in Hygraph. So it's really as simple as this. You have a UI where you create a remote source, you put some settings in, and then you have a connection between a remote system, either be it a RESTful or GraphQL API, and all that data comes together. And what that means is that you, in literally minutes, you can take information from different systems, connect it all together with content that's managed in Hygraph, and you have one unified GraphQL API that combines all that stuff. So examples of how we see customers using this today is for e-commerce use cases, for example, you have marketing content for products that sits in your CMS. Price and availability come from your e-commerce backend. Right? You don't want to put price and availability there because it can change all the time. So you connect your e-commerce system as a remote source. Your business users have tooling to do lookups and find the products that they're referencing in their content. Like I said, it's set up in minutes, and you have both performance and the ease of use of our GraphQL API, and you can put it all together. And it's just really as simple as this, right? So I do one query to Hygraph, getting data from the content management system, as well as data from the e-commerce system, or from some proprietary backend system, or from an open API that has some information that you want to put together. It's really a super powerful way of solving this stuff. So, I mean, this is a question for us, but I think it's interesting to look at this sort of in the wider market. Is okay, what's next? So, the way we see it, there's a really, in particular, the low-code, no-code approach to configuring all this stuff is a novel way of solving this integration problem. And we have tons of ideas for building this out further. So the first thing that we started is really connecting these remote sources. But there's many directions we want to take this forward with. So, of course, being mindful that there are also other legacy systems that can benefit from having a GraphQL layer on top. We're looking into support for like SOAP APIs. There's also different authentication methods that we're looking into. And in the end, where I see this going is that content federation becomes a full sort of middleware layer where you also have options for data transformation, all kinds of performance measurements and analytics, fine-grained access control, all these kinds of different things, all through an easy-to-use, simple interface. So yeah, I think exciting stuff ahead of us, and we're very keen to explore that. We're currently doing that with our customers and partners already, but I'm very keen to have this conversation also with people here online and here watching. So thanks. That's all I had. Are there any questions?
Well, I'll ask one.
Go ahead.
So this is not my area of expertise, so this may be a very stupid question, but
no worries.
GraphQL, the excitement about it is the flexibility of GraphQL.
Yeah.
And most businesses are looking at GraphQL and saying, I'm afraid also, right? Because I don't want the flexibility in the hands of those people to come in here and just ask for anything, right? So you don't typically see GraphQL used with third-party kinds of information. So what kind of comment do you have on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the thing with GraphQL is you put a lot of power basically in the hands of the consumer, right? The application that consumes content. And of course, I guess in particular for the kind of industries that we're speaking about at this conference, you have to be super mindful of authentication, access rights, and all these things on top. But I think one doesn't exclude the other. So it's for what we already have, and I think this is something that's very common in GraphQL APIs, is that we do have fine-grained access controls over the stuff here. Specifically for content federation, it's a really interesting topic to figure out, like, can we also extend permission and authentication scopes to these third-party sources, which is, I think, an unsolved problem for now. But it's a really interesting area for further investigation.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, so not my expertise either, but so I guess I missed what you define by content federation. Mm-hmm. And if it's what I understand, I would like to know how you handle, or how do you plan to handle data reads, those type of edge scenarios that you typically have with the distributed storage.
So you mean things like performance and those kinds of?
So for instance, again, I'm making the assumption that I know what it is, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So if I'm making a change I'm making a change, and before it gets propagated, somebody else accesses the data from another node.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll make the assumption that your assumption about content federation is accurate, because this is you're really identifying a key potential problem with this kind of setup, right? So if you have data in all these different sources, how do you make sure that that invalidation happens properly and is properly propagated? So that's a real problem, or like a challenge to solve in these architectures. So there are different ways of doing it. So you can look at things like making sure that there's communication between the different services, that they each get to control caching, for example, make sure that those are invalidated. But that requires more work for each of the consuming services. The way we solve that at the moment is by having very fine-grained configurable cache control in the middleware in the content federation setup that we have. So we configure it there. And additionally, which I think is a very flexible way to set it up, is that most, at least I guess you can expect that a lot of APIs have some sort of caching headers that align with how frequently the content gets updated. Right, so if you have something like price or availability, that needs to be near real time at least. And therefore you would want to set a very low, like a very quick refresh on your caching, which is something that we incorporate. But there is an additional way of potentially looking at this, which is like if you get the front end to take again that e-commerce example, that before you actually make a transaction, you do a final double check to make sure your data is still fresh. So those are a few ways to look at solving the problem.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.